Welcome to the latest. Say I'm back, but that doesn't make any sense. Still, my brain's just, I don't know. I feel like I should be working better than this, but I'm not today. Especially not today. I'm joined by my faithful, there we go, faithful co-hosts, Tom Grant. We're here to talk about all the latest rising talent in the MMA world. Most particularly, we'll be talking. I mean, this week really the standout name we're talking about is Paige VanZant. Also, Mckee Jr. over in Bellator. We'll be reflecting back on UFC 202 to start out too, and then taking a trip around the regional circuit to see who's fighting out there. But Tom, let's first just turn back to this UFC 202 card, which was absolutely hard. Talk about Cody Garbrandt.
Well, Cody Garbrandt got a quick and devastating win that looked like all of his other quick and devastating wins. And while it's a definitely a step forward for him in terms of who he's beaten and moving on up, to me it was impressive because I expected Mitsugaki to be at least more than a minute's worth of work for him. I expected it to be a test for Garbrandt, a wall that he would have to like kind of scale, and instead it ended up being a bank of fog he ran through.
Yeah, he really had no trouble blowing through Mizugaki, and it's the kind of performance, like, I get that it doesn't tell us anything new about Garbrandt's technical development as a fighter.
Yeah.
We don't know any new information about, like, what is he going to do when he's challenged by a really good wrestler, grappler? What is he going to do when he can't knock somebody out right away? We don't know that necessarily right now. But at the same time, it's a high enough profile knockout that at this point it's just like, well, he might as well be fighting for a title pretty quick, because you're not, at that point you're able to just walk through somebody in the top 10 of your division like they're not there. Then it doesn't really matter how many unanswered questions you have.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I totally understand the people who are saying that, like, we're not seeing those strides forward in the technical game of Cody Garbrandt. We're also not seeing him fight for more than a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to get a feel of him. He may be just coasting on the same skills and physical gifts that have taken him this far. But at this point, like you said, he's not progressing technically, but where he is apparently good enough to absolutely demolish someone who is a very well-respected top 10 fighter in his division.
Yeah. I mean, if your skills and your gifts are taking you that far, then fine. Let him take him all the way to a title shot. Like, that's, that's what part of what sports and athletics are about, is seeing people perform, seeing the raw gifts that somebody possesses. Like, sometimes you're really just watching, like, oh my God, look at how fucking fast this dude is.
Yeah, it is one of those things that kind of like combat sports, and really not really combat sports, more like fight card sports, where like it's matchmaking that determines things more than success. There is this like, oh man, but is he ready? Should he step up? And in other sports, like when you have a young athlete, be it a guy like a wide receiver in football, it's not like, oh, well, next week on the schedule is like one of the best corners in the league. Oh, I don't know. Should we not have him face this guy? It's like, no, that's who's on your schedule. And sometimes guys, even with big holes in their game per se, within the context of their sport, are able to step up and compete. And I agree with you. It's much more of like a traditional sport idea where it's like, no, if he's earned it, he's earned it. It doesn't matter kind of what his technique progression looks like.
Also on this card, we saw very impressive debuts from Marvin. Well, this was his debut.
Yes,
very impressive debuts from Marvin Vettori and Mike Perry. Perry's came with a lot of extra stupid baggage that we have not seen all the fallout from yet, because his cornerman. Did you miss all of that?
I might have. What happened with it?
His cornerman was Alex Nicholson, because they trained together. And in the warm-up, while the fighters were getting ready in the octagon, watching across from each other, Nicholson said that he can't even open his motherfucking eyes, boy, about Hyung-Yu Lim being Asian.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
And also apparently, like, they tweeted out on their way to the fights and put on Facebook, like, Wong's ass or something. Is just like this really terrible, stereotypical racist bullshit.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, and Perry, to his great discredit, has been unwilling to step away from it. He's just like, oh, whatever. He's just, he didn't mean it like that. And it's like, nah, that's. They've already rebooked Perry, so he's not. It looks like they're not going to make him face a lot of backlash for this, but Nicholson may end up getting canned for it. Yeah,
well, that would be appropriate in my eyes. Don't punish Perry for his idiot cornerman. Punish the cornerman, especially if the guy is a UFC fighter. So yeah,
that's what makes it worse.
Yeah,
frankly.
Generally speaking, like I was more. Both of them were really impressive, but to a certain degree, like the fact that Vettori just totally navigated and negated such a larger opponent in Alberto Uda was deeply impressive to me. That said, both let's talk about Vettori because I don't want to place one above the other. Both had really impressive debuts. Vettori kind of leaned on what I feel like his base is, which is more submission grappling and grappling. He shot in pretty quick. And then if I remember correctly, he ended up pulling guard off the shot and hitting the sweep takedown pretty shortly after that. And then once he got into the driver's seat on dominant position, that was pretty much the rest of the fight. He was there and then finished the choke. Really nice showing from him. Mike Perry cleaned up his striking a lot from his last fight. It still wasn't pretty. It still wasn't perfect, but it had come a long way from when he was fighting on like the Battleground card, in the middle of Florida. So,
well, I think it says a lot too that he had an opponent in there who's like 4 inches taller than him, 5 inches taller than him, a hugely powerful knockout artist, and he really did not flinch at all facing him down and making Lim or letting Lim miss and then firing back with bigger and harder shots that found their mark. And that's a really good sign as somebody who's going to depend a lot on his physical gifts and his power, is that he's also seems pretty fearless.
Yeah. So no, I think there was definitely the way he got in exchanges was impressive. It might get him in trouble later on, but it was impressive.
Yeah, but it won't get him in. It won't get him in more trouble than shying away and backing down and covering up and really just trying to stay out of harm's way. Like, not with his style.
Yeah.
But Vettori, yeah, I mean, I really like to see. I'm glad to see what I did out of Vettori because in that fight, I really felt like Uda is kind of an underwhelming athletic specimen, frankly. And Vettori is a really solid athlete who's still a pretty raw fighter. So it was good to see him just being the better athlete go out there and press that. Like, use his advantages, be faster, be more dynamic, use his squeeze, things like that to going to keep up with him as long as he did that and didn't fight Uda's fight. So
I would agree with that. I thought both looked excellent. It was the really nice pair of debuts on this card, and overall it was like a really awesome card.
Yeah. So the other people to talk about, Colby Covington looked good, looked solid, did exactly what he was supposed to do against Max Griffin.
That was a Colby Covington fight. Like that is what a dominant Colby Covington. He just sucks the life out of you, and then the referee just takes pity on you and stops the fight.
Yeah, I mean, and he had exactly the right opponent to set that up against. Too. Griffin doesn't wrestle. relies way too much on explosive athleticism, and just it was set up for Colby to get that win.
We said it. You don't go about out-athleting Colby Covington.
No.
Like, he's a phenomenal athlete who's also just, you know,
he's a very deep technical wrestler. So
yeah, and then just like really nasty mental game too. Like, just wears you down.
Yep. So the other prospect fight on this card, Courtney Casey versus Randa Marcos, that was just kind of a disappointment. Like, I know I've been low on Casey, so I feel like I should be higher on her now that she's got this win, because I didn't think she'd win this fight, and so I should be impressed. But Randa Marcos just looked bad.
Yes, there was definitely an element of, you and I both talked about it, maybe going from TriStar to Michigan top team wasn't the best move. And maybe it's not that TriStar should be the automatic fix for every fighter, but like, generally speaking, there's probably a top level camp that is the right fit for you, generally speaking, out there. And it's kind of on you when you're a professional fighter looking to take that next step to find that right fit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Michigan top team, I would not consider to be like a total trash camp. It's definitely in the tier below something like an American top team, Jackson Wink, Kings, TriStar, those.
It's a very decidedly not top tier camp. It's not no name. They've produced some good guys, but I've not seen a consistent stream of guys coming out of Michigan top team. I don't look for the next Michigan top team fighter.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so it is a. We've talked about this before, but there is a level of coaching and sparring partner that's required to succeed in this sport. And right now, because of how young this sport is, access to both those things are fairly limited. It's getting better. It is way better than it was 10 years ago. But it's still fairly limited. And if you're really serious about making a run, you kind of have to seek out the right, it needs to be the right fit for you, but you need to seek out one of these high-level rooms and coaching experiences.
Yeah, well, and I also it may just be something to do with Marcos. Maybe she just doesn't have quite the right fit of athletic abilities and talents. What worked for her on Tough, it may just, like, she looks so awkward, when she's fighting. It's just... It's hard to, like, if Ben Askren didn't have his deep wrestling game, would he be able to adjust to, like, a good complex MMA game?
Yeah.
Some fighters just look like some fighters are just always too awkward to turn a corner,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't want to be like...
There's a limit to how successful fighters can be, and yeah, I'm not really sure where Marcos falls at this point, but it definitely was not a good fight for her.
No. So let's move on then to this week, UFC on Fox, Maia versus Condit, and there are a lot of young fighters, there are a lot of new fighters on here that are not familiar to MMA fans. Frankly, there's not a whole lot to be hugely excited about in terms of prospects.
This card is full of either like replacements or guys that like the UFC has been meaning to get a fight for a while, and they kind of threw them on this card.
Well, and they also decided, like, oh man, we really don't have enough Canadians, so they went out and signed like 4 new Canadian fighters for this card.
Yeah, and I wonder how long these guys are going to stick around, like most of these guys, because it's not. It is definitely falling into kind of that generic UFC fighter mold where it's like there's not a lot distinguishing some of these guys who have been signed on. I mean, it's still huge for them, obviously, and there are a few guys that could maybe make their way into the middle of the pack in their weight classes, but on first look, it doesn't look like we have any like sterling diamond in the rough types on this one.
No. So that makes the biggest person to talk about off this card, Paige VanZant, who is still, who, despite losing her last fight out, is still very much an elite, near blue chip strawweight prospect in her division. A top tier athlete who's super tough and who may not have the technical depth, especially as a striker yet, but has great, she's got great cardio. She's got a really pressuring, bullying game that's made to win rounds, and who I'm expecting to succeed pretty handily here in this fight against Bec Rawlings.
Yeah, I think you put it perfectly. She's a great athlete who plays a bully, aggressive, physical style. She plays a game that benefits from technical proficiency, but isn't predicated on it.
Yeah.
She makes it a nasty, athletic fight with you. And it is going to work for her pretty well against most competition. She ran into Rose Namajunas, who is a similar fighter of mindset. I think the Namajunas fight, at least if showed us if nothing else, that mentally Paige is a fighter.
Yeah.
She fought through things in that fight that most other MMA fighters, professional MMA fighters, probably would have succumbed to.
Yeah, I mean the big problem in that fight really ended up being that she really does not. Her game isn't deep enough as a wrestler and grappler to be elite right now, and her striking game is not competitive.
Yeah, I mean that was a skill gap that lost her that fight. In that, because she ran into a similarly elite athlete with a similar mindset and that similar fighter's attitude. So then the difference maker really was the skill, and there was a pretty significant difference there.
Yeah. And Bec Rawlings, she just doesn't seem like she's not that level of athlete. We've seen her getting in better shape. She's become a little more consistent with her striking, a little more dynamic, a little more fluid, but she has to work so hard to pull all that off because she's not an awesome athlete that she also just gets really tired. It's just you're putting that much effort into making everything work, you're going to get tired. And that seems to be that's the kind of thing where I think VanZant, even if she has a little trouble early in this fight, she should be able to overcome it. And considering, how strong an interest the UFC and Uriah Faber have taken in her career, they're probably not going to, she's probably not going to get rushed even off a good win here. It's not the kind of thing where she's going to beat Bec Rawlings and they're going to be like, all right, time to fight Claudia Gadelha next.
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing with VanZant and probably Northcutt too, a lot more, a lot of difficult and hard-headed realizations that the UFC actually has to physically pump the brakes on these fighters.
Yeah.
They really want to rush them, and then every time they're going to try rushing them, they're going to end up just wrecking them. So VanZant, I think she's got a little better people in her corner to work with that. And I think Faber's probably a bit more on the ball with the needs of her matchmaking than maybe the people Northcutt's working with.
Yeah.
But it's going to have to, I think there's going to be a lot of needing to fight Joe Silva and Sean Shelby and their desires.
Yeah, I think that actually is something in Paige VanZant's favor. While Team Alpha Male isn't in terms of coaching, there's been a lot of questions about how they run their gym and all this, and there's I think it's been pretty clearly demonstrated by people who have trained there and things like that, and things that you and I have heard both publicly and just through the gym grapevine, that Team Alpha Male is kind of a generation behind in terms of how they structure their camps and their gym and things like that. But in terms of the representation you get with Team Alpha Male, Uriah Faber is an excellent guy to have in your corner in the figurative sense when making deals with the UFC and matchmaking and things like that. I think that's a good point where Sage Northcutt, not really sure. He's getting himself really tough fights with nobodies not like with nobodies, but like less than known fighters who are presenting like big stylistic problems for him, and then he is struggling mightily against them, and it's actively decaying his like fighter appeal. Whereas I kind of agree that VanZant, they are realizing they need to glad hand them a little bit if they're going to build these fighters out of, hey, here's a pretty good athlete who's just barely started MMA, and like personality wise, we think we could do something with, but it's going to take like 4 to 5 years of development in the UFC. And the first guy I can really think of, at least in my watching time, where that was kind of like people kind of thought of that being a thing, was when the UFC brought Matt Riddle on Tough despite having no pro fights. And then basically we watched him fight his first like whole run of professional fights inside the UFC. And it was interesting to watch the UFC and how they handled him. And I think it's pretty easy to say that they kind of mishandled him at times.
Yeah, well, it's just the UFC is an almost impossible place to grow. That's really what it comes down to. Like, it's a incredibly difficult place to be a young fighter who's still learning the game.
Especially like in 2008 when the UFC still was kind of like the quote-unquote major league.
Yeah, but even today, like, you know, looking at this fight card in front of us, a not very good, not very deep fight card with a couple of great fights, with a few great fights at the top. Like, even, you know, Enrique Barzola, who is just some total, you know, he's a tough guy, tough Latin America fighter, not anybody's ever heard of. He's still 11-2, you know? He's still been fighting since 2012. He's still put together a good regional record. Gareth McClellan, you know, this good dude's not anybody to speak of. He came out of EFC Africa, and he's still 13-4. And like almost everybody in the UFC, even the fighters you have never heard of at all, they usually come in with this strong run of success and are at least reasonably attuned to being, reasonably used to being one of the best guys around where they fought. And when you're bringing in fighters like Northcutt and like VanZant, who have barely started, like, they're not used to anything. They're not used to any level of, they're just trying to figure out how the sport works.
Yeah.
And you have a bunch of people who, you know, maybe they had long amateur careers, maybe they had long other competitive careers in other sports, and they're very used to competition and they're used to succeeding. And they, you know, the UFC is still a really, really tough place to learn how to fight when you're fighting always that kind of competition.
Yep.
So otherwise on this card, I do want to say, like, I am actually interested in this Barzola versus Bochniak fight.
Yeah.
I gotta, like, Barzola may not be quite athlete enough to succeed in the UFC long term. He's got this janky game, lots of broken rhythm movement, funky striking, kind of funky wrestling. But he seems like one of those dudes that works really hard. And like, funky wrestling can be one of those skills where if you're actually like consistent about it, a lot of fighters just can't match that. Like, we've seen guys like Ben Askren, aforementioned, and Michael Chiesa, and a few other fighters who just have these really weird, active, aggressive wrestling games in wrestling rooms, and they keep having surprising success because of it.
Yeah, no, I agree that his and especially in this fight, which is kind of like a throwbacky wrestler versus striker sort of matchup, which kind of there are a lot of on this card. It's kind of like a lot of like incomplete games being matched together. Enrique's got like that kind of like developing grinder game with like a little bit of striking. And Bochniak is kind of like a little bit of an MMA striker metagame in the making, but doesn't throw nearly enough strikes to really be in line with like the current MMA metagame striker game.
Yeah, I will say I'm still picking Bochniak to win this because he's powerful and he's well-rounded. But I'm interested in the fight. Like, I like Bochniak too, just out of like a pure athlete kind of thing. Seems like he's got the physical tools.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little better fight on a card that otherwise, like, I'm most excited about 32-year-old Adam Hunter.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. Where it's like, okay, yeah, Adam Hunter, who's pretty much is a really big, powerful striker, and that's kind of it.
Yeah. He's a middleweight, too, which means that he's in a division bad enough that if he hits hard and he's tough and he's willing to stand in the pocket, he could be really successful.
Mm-hmm.
Like, middleweight's just such a weird division that a dude like Adam Hunter, even at 32, could, like, have 5 years of success.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested to see what happens with him. I know there's some hype going around about Jeremy Kennedy, partially just because he's young and Canadian.
Yeah, he seems to have a like. I only found a little bit of tape on him, and he seems to have like a very takedown focused game, but seems to be good at it. So we'll find out.
Yeah, he's got some nice counterboxing. He's an aggressive wrestler, aggressive grappler. He's mostly fought cans, which is not a good thing.
Yeah.
As he's taken even small steps up in competition, his knockouts and submissions have turned to decisions really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if he's quite got the physical tools to be an actual hot prospect down the road, but I'll be really interested to see what he does. I expect him to beat Alex Ricci at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, Felipe Silva is kind of an interesting, powerful Muay Thai striker without a lot else going on.
Yeah.
And that's it, really.
He's not really that interesting. I mean, like,
Alessio De Chirico. That's the other dude. I keep forgetting about him. Who I have a soft spot. I am interested in him because I feel like he's got a little bit of the like. It's like Chris Weidman without the wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's got this sort of. He's not the fastest dude in the cage, but he's got a surprising athleticism and power to him. I think like as a lot of people do, that he either could have, should have, or did win his debut against Bojan Velišković, but he should beat Gareth McClellan.
Yeah, it is a weird card that we have going on. Though good main card, really good main card.
Yeah, the main card should be fun. Top two fights are good. Joe Lowe. Push Rawlings.
Yeah.
And the rest of the cards, it's pretty low quality, even for a UFC prelim card.
Yeah, it's filler. It's very fillerish.
So that takes us over to Bellator, and a couple of big prospects fighting over there for Bellator. Bubba Jenkins, who we've seen kind of slowly making his way up the ranks after a very hyped start, and AJ Mckee Jr., who's probably the guy I'm most excited on this card. He seems like a much more exciting and athletically diverse fighter than his father and namesake.
Yeah, no, it's the card itself is rather interesting because obviously Bubba Jenkins is rematching his one of his two losses.
Yep, to Georgi Karakhanyan. I'm still not sure he's ready for Karakhanyan.
Yeah, but at least at this point, he is better prepared than when they threw him to Karakhanyan like the last time. Yeah. So that's a fight. It's a good fight to kind of take a measure of and see how far Bubba Jenkins has come because he came in with so much hype back when like an NCAA wrestler entering MMA was like everyone considered that to be then he's the next champion of whatever weight class he's going into.
And it's also, he was one of the early guys in the Bellator press, like the current and ongoing Bellator press for every single good American wrestler interested in starting any kind of MMA career.
Yep, he was the first one, wasn't he? He was like the first one they really went out and got early.
Yeah, well, I mean, Michael Chandler too. They got him pretty early in his career. There were a few others that they touched, but Bubba Jenkins and Darian Caldwell are sort of like part of the first wave of the new focus.
Yeah. Speaking of which, on this card,
Joey Davis.
Yeah, I was gonna say Joey Davis being on this card.
DQ national champion.
First pro fight happening
Yep.
in Bellator, which will be interesting. And then, as you said, AJ Mckee Jr., who looks like is a very interesting fighter moving forward.
Yeah, I really like AJ's game. He's very aggressive, very willing striker. Seems like he has a natural rhythm and power to his game, and then he's still got that stifling wrestling game too that his dad made famous. So, one of the few legacy fighters in MMA. That's like the real rarity to see. Like,
it may become more common it's definitely going to become more common.
Well, yeah, we're gonna have Kimbo, Kevin Ferguson, Baby Slice, coming on, and we've had Ryan Couture, and AJ Mckee Jr., and all these fighters. We see all these fighters having kids.
Yeah.
Some of them, they're going to turn a lot of them to MMA.
How many Eddie Alvarez offspring are going to end up in MMA? All 12 of them, or just 6?
Considering Eddie Alvarez's attitude towards fighting, I would bet most. I feel like most. He seems like a dude pretty dedicated to the fight game.
He'll contribute a baker's dozen to MMA.
Yeah. Outside of Bellator. The guy I saw on the fighting out sort of on the regionals this week that I'm really excited about is Ismael Naurdiev.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about him before the show, but man, he is a big time pressure fighter who charges you with punch kick combos, and as soon as you back up, he runs you down to the fence and then grabs a power takedown, just lifts people up above his head with amazing ease, and then drops them on the mat.
Yeah, he reminds me of a little bit, and both kind of in look too is Josh Thompson.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
He reminds me of the classic Josh, sort of Strikeforce era punk where he would just fly out of the gate at people with these great kickboxing combinations, change straight into wrestling and then grappling behind it. And he's only got one loss, a prospect submission loss, a 40-second loss to some guy named Sem Kaya. But otherwise, he's out working on the European scene, fighting this week for an Austrian promotion, WFC 20. And he's 10-1. Most of his wins, all but one of his wins by submission or KO. So I'm excited for this kid. I'm interested to see what he can do. He's actually Austrian, and he's only 20. So.
So other than that, there's some other fighters out there, but it's kind of a slow regional weekend.
Yeah, I mean there's Cody Stamann too in the U.S. Really kind of a bricked up little powerhouse of a fighter that I'm interested in. Good, solid, hard punching, dynamic fighter. Also Jared Gooden got a nice technical clean kickboxing game. Watched some tape on him on the regionals, and a good prospect fight. Edward Toms versus Tyler Diamond. There's this card that they're fighting on. Let's see. Let me pull it up here. This card they're fighting on is his is Global Knockout 7. Never mind. I thought it was something. There's a fight card where Joby Sanchez is fighting. Yeah, no, this is that fight. Global Knockout 7. And Tyler Diamond is a Team Alpha Male guy. Edward Toms is a Hawaiian fighter. Both 4-0. I'm interested to see that. Toms looks like a good, aggressive wrestler. And like I say, Joby Sanchez, former UFC flyweight, still early in his career. Jackson Wink product is on that card. RFA fighter Sam Toomer is on that card. So that card's got some interesting regional U.S. talent on it that are going to be a lot. A lot of people looking to make it to the next level.
Yeah,
I would say.
Awesome.
On that note, it's time to close the show. You can find me on Twitter at DZaneSimon. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. You can give this video a like. That's a thumbs up over on YouTube. That's down below. Click that. That helps us a bunch. Subscribe to MMANation.com. It's DOTCOM. That's our YouTube channel. And that's where you get all the latest BE shows, videos, interviews, analysis, all that good stuff. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you next week.